Dystopia warning, obviously. Welcome back to the land of no hope and Tories. Well, you know, not for much longer. So once again, I'm talking to you about the general election, 2024 day. The one skill that they're showing throughout this campaign is how to lose an election. I've spent 4 years roasting Conservatives, and it's finally got to a point where there's actually no sport in it for me. You know, I can kind of put the car on cruise and just watch the horrors unfold. It's like being in a fight with a toddler that is punching itself. I mean, both literally, because, you know, and also metaphorically. It's kind of like a stop, he's already dead moment. Am I going to stop though? Am I? I've got the Union flag behind me today because I want to talk to you about fake patriotism and nostalgia. Pretty fitting in the wake of Rishi Sunak ducking out of the D-Day commemorations halfway through the day. Probably one of the most unbelievably shocking decisions that a Prime Minister can ever make, but absolutely insane for a Prime Minister that's trying to win an election campaign. But then I don't really think he's trying to win. I mean, the odds have been against him, literally, in terms of polling from the onset. And the campaign has been so disastrous so far, it's almost as if the opposition are running it. I mean, this is the moment we've been waiting for years, but it just feels weird. It's unsettling. It feels chaotic, and it feels like he's just about to snap and run, which would create yet another unprecedented situation. I miss precedented times. So I'm going to give you a quick rundown of some other things that have happened this week, and then we're going to talk about that. So let's go back a couple of days. It's supposed to signify going back in time. Farage's Milkshake brought all the fash to the pier, and they're like, I'm not racist, even though everything they say is racist. So Total went to Clacton Pier, where he got milkshaked by a young woman, and I found this entire thing extremely disappointing. Because it was milkshake and not piss. Then there was all this faux outrage and pearl clutching. Oh, they shouldn't be throwing milkshakes in. Oh, shut up. You know, back in the day, people used to throw bricks at fascists. You should count yourself lucky it was milkshake. And then you got all the thick fuck. You going, oh, what if it was acid? What if it was a nuke? If my nan had wheels, she'd be a bicycle. I don't want to give that too much time. He's already paraded around on television stations like some kind of like little fash tart. But what I will say is that the Tories had a 24,000 majority in Clacton at the last general election. At the moment, it's neck and neck between Labour and Tory. Reform would have to get over 24,000 votes. What I think the most likely outcome is going to be is that it's going to split the far right vote, and Labour will hopefully sail through. But you know, we don't live in normal times, do we? There was a whole bunch of older white people that turned out in the middle of the day. People that would believe anything. I'm half tempted to set up a magic bean stall in Clacton. So, you know, if he does do it, we'll just have to hope there's a tsunami, won't we? Did hear a funny story about Farage this week though. Pop Bitch ran a story about a pub in London that keeps a glass just for Nigel Farage whenever he visits. A glass that the staff all fart in before covering it with a coaster for the next person. You see, the landlord knew the staff hated him, but he didn't want to ban him outright, so he came to a compromise with the fart glass. Hopefully all of Nigel's, oh look at me, I'm a real working class person and not a guy that went to prep school shtick, will be ruined by the fear, the paranoia. Every glass from which he sips in a London pub will be brimming with farts. Beautiful. In other news, there was the live television debate, wasn't there, between Sunak and Starmer. Now, Starmer didn't come across as particularly polished. He came across as a bit nervous, a bit human. Probably worth bearing in mind that psychopaths don't get nervous. Anyway, he might not be an all-singing, all-dancing, natural performer, but he's a good lawyer. He let Sunak repeat the £2,000 tax rise lie, knowing full well that all the time Labour had the letter that proved Conservative claims that the civil service independently costed the £2,000 were lies. And it got much worse in the days after, because everyone started doing maths and the Tories lost the Spectator. Watershed moment in politics. My personal favourite moment was right at the beginning. You see, Starmer and Sunak just had to stand there with Julie Etchingham and just look normal for a bit. Do you think that Sunak was able to manage that? Well, here's a clip. I'll let you decide.
We're live in Salford for the very first time in this election. It's Sunak versus Starmer, the ITV debate.
What the fuck was that? I know we all joke that Rishi Sunak is like a robot, right? But Christ, in that clip, he looked like a deeply broken, extremely low budget sex doll that has just enough sentience to be haunted by what it's experienced. Right, back to Sunak and his D-Day dodging. This is just a prime example of the Conservatives and Reform's fake patriotism. He could not give a solitary shit about those veterans. Now, he has been condemned by everyone for doing this, and rightly so. It's an insult to the dead, and it's an insult to the surviving men that faced unimaginable horrors on D-Day. But does it surprise me? No. You see, people like Sunak, like Farage, they used this flag not as a symbol of their patriotism, but as a marketing tool. Implemented by old Etonians, men that went to private school, marketing themselves as wheeler dealers. You know, like used car salesmen that live in castles. They flog that fake patriotism, that nostalgia, to bigots or to people with no identity who rely on nationalism to give them some kind of meaning in life. Those people inevitably know that they're being conned deep down, but they fall into a sunk cost fallacy where they'd rather continue to be conned and see it through rather than admit that they've had the absolute piss taken out of them by posh lads any idiot can wave a flag about, and this lot use it to hide a multitude of sins. They use it to hide the fact that they were, whilst we died of COVID, giving their mates lucrative contracts which they bought yachts with, which cost us billions in debt and fraud. They used the flag to hide the fact that with Brexit, well, it was nothing more than engineered decline, destroying the country, our prosperity, our economy, so their city mates could make millions. Those things alone, and there's more, are the antithesis of patriotism, of service and of duty. This guy wants kids to do national service. He can't even stay at a D-Day commemoration for an entire day. And you've got to remember, everything that I'm saying, that's Farage's MO too. It's a con. Anyway, let's get on to old Robot Lad's apology, shall we? Because wow.
Having participated in all the British events with British veterans, I returned home before the International Leaders event. On reflection, that was a mistake and I apologise. I think it's important though, given the enormity of the sacrifice made, that we don't politicise this. The focus should rightly be on the veterans who gave so much.
There's a common theme with Sunak, right? He's not used to having to explain himself. So when he does, all he can throw out are these like media-trained, scripted performances, like he's like a cunty Johnny Five, you know, I am sorry. I'm surprised he didn't bring up furlough. He makes a point of how he attended the British events, didn't he? And this was a commemoration of collective effort, of allied forces coming together. He also says it's not political. War is kind of inherently political, mate. And so were his reasons for leaving. So he could attempt to salvage his skip fire of a general election campaign. Was introducing a veterans bill not political, Sunak? Unbelievable. Not to mention that Adam Bienkov reported they initially refused to go at all, and only agreed to go in part in a compromise with the French. This was denied by Number 10, but you know, they deny a lot of shit, don't they? Partygate. I mean, this is the Conservatives all over. Look at what they were doing as Kabul fell. In case you weren't aware, Boris Johnson and Dominic Raab were both on holiday at the time, as our desperate allies clung to planes that were taking off. Allied forces fought and died trying to protect people from a man that spread hate and fear about particular groups of people in order to justify taking their lives. Look at the culture wars, look at the racism, the Islamophobia, the othering of this Conservative government that's been heavily influenced by politicians like Farage. Neither of them have any place in British politics, not to mention that Reform aren't even a political party, they're a business. Farage is a fucking con man, I'll say it with my chest. And who facilitates this though? The media allowed this to happen for years. Despite the horrors, they continue to show both in a positive light. I wonder why that is. Tax breaks? So what happens? These liars are allowed to spread the con that as peak establishment figures, there's some kind of, political punk? These are all privately educated men with past lives and big city jobs, with big city mates that they're being bankrolled by, who want a bit of return on their investment. And who are all the people believing it? Well, they're just a conduit. This country has a huge problem with believing bullshitters, but it also has a big problem with the people that facilitate. I'll give you a little real-time example. This is Kate Ferguson, right? Political journalist, which is kind of, laughable turn of phrase when it comes to the Sun, but I digress. Here she is defending the government's lie about Labour's £2,000 tax hike, right? What Kate's not telling you is whose dick she's holding. Rumour has it she's banging the Conservative Party chair, who is insanely named Dick Holden. And there we are. Anyway, I'm off to take some Valium. It's the first 7-way debate tonight. Probably the only time in existence a 7-way hasn't been enjoyable. And I'll be back at some point to tell you all about it. I'll be smiling, but my eyes will be saying, help me. Please help me. There's a month to go.